Undercover boss grabs breakfast, freezes when the waitress says she's living off leftovers. Michael Carter, the man, who once started everything from a humble, street-side eatery, sat quietly in an old taxi, his eyes following each familiar street that led to Sunrise Diner, the very first branch of the empire he had built with his calloused hands and an unyielding heart. He was now 50 years old. His hair had grayed, but in his eyes a fire still smoldered, not ambition, but a silent, gnawing worry he couldn't quite put into words. In the old days, Michael knew exactly how each tablecloth was folded, which employees were struggling, and what his regular customers would order the moment they walked through the door. But that was before Sunrise expanded, before the thick stacks of weekly financial reports arrived, filled with dreamlike revenue figures and perfectly smooth growth charts that made it seem like everything was under control. Yet intuition, that gut feeling every founder carries after grinding through every inch of their business, was now screaming for his attention. Lately, there had been rumors, scattered whispers about employees quitting mid-shift, about poor service, about the food just not being the same anymore. But every time Michael questioned his senior management, he received the same rehearsed response. "Everything is fine, sir. Revenue remains stable. Growth is on target." But stable was just a word done far too easy to print on a report. It wasn't a reflection of the truth. And that's why today, Michael had put on an old jacket, pulled down the brim of his cap, used a different name, and returned to the very place that was once the heart of Sunrise. To quietly observe, to quietly listen, and if necessary, to quietly make things right. He brought no advisors, he gave no notice. Just himself and one looming question without an answer. Is Sunrise still truly Sunrise? The morning air inside Sunrise Diner felt heavy, as if it carried the same weight pressing down on the man seated quietly in the corner. Michael Carter silently took in the space he once knew like the back of his hand, but now felt strangely unfamiliar. The once carefully polished wooden tables now bore faint scuff marks. The aroma of rich coffee, which used to fill the air and ease even the hardest of days, was now diluted, faint, barely noticeable, amidst the lingering scent of overused frying oil. He ordered a simple breakfast, the very meal that once made Sunrise Diner famous, the classic Sunrise breakfast. A while later, a young waitress brought his meal. Her eyes briefly met his, but only for a fleeting second before she quickly looked away. A strained, tired smile appeared on her lips, but it couldn't hide the deep exhaustion written plainly across her weary eyes. The porcelain plate was gently placed on the table. The eggs had gone cold, the toast was as hard as stone, and the thin smear of butter was nothing more than a pale streak across the surface of the bread. Everything before him felt like a bitter reflection of those perfect reports he read every day. The young waitress turned away to pour coffee for the customer at the next table, and then Michael heard it. Her voice dropped low, a fragile whisper swallowed by the heavy, suffocating air. "I've been living off leftovers from the kitchen. My wages are being held back, and I don't even have enough to buy breakfast." The cup of coffee in Michael's hand suddenly felt unbearably heavy. The hands that once signed monumental decisions with unwavering resolve now trembled faintly. He looked down at the plate before him, the very meal he once personally tasted every single day to ensure that Sunrise would never serve anything mediocre. Now, it was tasteless. His throat felt parched, a bitter taste rising to the tip of his tongue, and it wasn't from the watered-down coffee, but from a deep, painful anguish welling up in his heart. Michael sat there in a daze, his eyes following the small, fragile figure of the young waitress, struggling between indifferent customers and their hurried complaints. In that moment, he heard nothing else but the echo of her words, repeating endlessly in his mind, "I've been living off leftovers." And at that very instant, a truth as sharp as a dagger slashed through the pride of the founder. He who had once sworn that no one would ever go hungry under the roof, bearing the name Sunrise, had become disconnected from reality for far too long. And in that same moment, a new vow was silently made. In the days that followed, Michael no longer returned to the leather chair in his lavish office. Instead, he chose to face reality, returning to confront the very creation he once believed had matured and thrived on its own Sunrise Diner. But as the days passed, the truth was peeled back layer by bitter layer, each one colder and harsher than any winter he had ever known. Early morning. Before the sunlight had a chance to break through the dusty windows, Michael was already there. The employees shuffled in, their bodies sluggish, dark circles under tired eyes. There were no longer cheerful greetings to start the shift, just indifferent nods and the cold, grating sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Noon. The diner was packed. From his familiar, hidden corner, Michael silently watched every movement unfold. Plates of toast were hurriedly brought out dry and cold, to the point that the butter couldn't even melt. The slices of bread were as hard as stone, cutting into the hearts of those who served them as harshly as the burdens weighing down their shoulders. The coffee once, his proud signature, the flavor that awakens an entire day, was now as watery as tinted liquid, its thin foam vanishing in a blink. On the digital menu board, the prices stood tall like a challenge to reel it outrageously high, arrogant, and utterly indifferent. Behind the counter, Garethi branch manager repeated the same cold mantra, his voice as flat and lifeless as the soulless numbers on a financial report. Cut the butter in half, reduce the jam, dilute the coffee, more customers won't notice. Tips, collect them into the internal fund. And anyone who doesn't like it, the door's always open. Those words fell like icy pebbles into a deep, hopeless abyss. And then, the moment that froze Michael's heart completely. As the afternoon light stretched thinly across the cold stainless steel counter, he saw a hearthy young waitress, her small frame wrapped in a faded apron, curled up in a dark corner of the kitchen. In her hands was a scrap of stale bread, which she bit into slowly tiny mouthfuls, as if trying to quiet the gnawing emptiness in her stomach after a grueling shift. Right beside her lay a crumpled overdue rent notice, its creased corners stained and torn. The glaring red numbers stood out like open wounds that refused to heal. Her weary eyes were glued to the screen of an old, battered phone, where a cold, heartless notification blinked relentlessly. Power disconnection. Warning, effective tomorrow. And then, as if she had grown used to swallowing her tears, she drew in a deep, quiet breath, stood up, straightened her worn apron, and stepped out of the shadows. Her eyes still rimmed red, but on her lips appeared a faint smile, fragile but resilient as though, no matter how fierce the storm, she refused to let go of the last sliver of hope flickering in her heart. Michael stood there, as if turned to stone. His eyes stung, his fists clenched so tight, his knuckles turned white. Every carefully written word on those polished reports he had trusted seemed to collapse right before his eyes. He realized it was his indifference, his blind faith in numbers, that had pushed Sunrise Diner to the brink of tragedy. Sunrise Diner didn't lack customers. Sunrise Diner had lost the people who once loved and devoted themselves to it. And at that very moment, in the heart of a man who had once stood so proudly amidst the business world, a silent but resolute vow echoed, "I have let the flame here fade for far too long, but from this very moment, I will be the one to reignite the light it deserves." And this time, he wouldn't delay. That night, for the first time in years, Michael didn't return to his familiar, luxurious mansion. He wandered through the old streets, those same streets where, years ago, he used to sell simple sandwiches, the humble beginnings of what would become Sunrise Diner. The night's chill crept through the thin lapels of his suit, but it was nothing compared to the desolate emptiness swirling inside his heart. Light rain began to fall. Michael stopped in front of an old bakery, long since closed down the very place where he once spent hours, cradling in his hands the dreams of creating a place where people could find the warmest breakfasts, both for their stomachs and their souls. In that moment, he remembered the eyes of that young girl earlier today, eyes brimming with tears, yet still shining with hope. She hadn't left, because she still believed. But what about him? When did he give up on his own ideals? Dawn broke. Michael returned to Sunrise Diner just as the first rays of sunlight touched the frost-covered windows. This time, he didn't hide. This time, he wasn't here to observe. Quietly, he was here to act. His footsteps echoed across the worn tiles, stirring those who had barely closed their eyes after the graveyard shift. Staff members froze, their stunned eyes turning toward the man they had only ever seen in old framed photos, John, the founder. Without hesitation, he called for an emergency meeting. His voice rang out without the need for a microphone, resonating across the entire dining hall. Today, dawn is not just breaking beyond these windows. The dawn of Sunrise Diner must begin within the heart of every person standing here. And I, who once lit the very first flame for this place, accept full responsibility for letting it burn out for so long. The large screen lit up. Real, unfiltered footage played. The cold, heartless words of manager Gary echoed through the space. And in that moment, not only the employees, but John himself saw clearly the harsh image of what Sunrise Diner had become. He didn't hesitate. The termination papers were signed on the spot, accompanied by a declaration that rang out like an oath. From this very moment, all injustices end. Every genuine smile will be restored. And for those who are willing to stand with me, Sunrise Diner will no longer be a place where weariness lingers, but a place where hope shines bright. A round of applause erupted, crashing like waves over a parched shore. A new chapter of Sunrise Diner had officially begun, and this time, it started right from the place where everything had once fallen apart to be reignited, brighter than ever before. That very morning, Sunrise Diner, main hall, the atmosphere was tense, stretched tight like a taut string. Employees stood quietly in line, nervously exchanging glances. Rumors of an unprecedented emergency meeting had spread throughout the diner, but no one expected that the person stepping through the doors at exactly 9 a.m. would be the founder himself. John appeared, clad in a sharp gray suit, standing tall and firm like an old oak weathering a storm. On his chest, a gleaming name tag reflected the morning light. John, CEO, founder, Sunrise Restaurant Group. The entire hall fell into a heavy silence. Garetha branch manager stood frozen behind the counter, his hands trembling uncontrollably. The young waitress, the one whose struggles had haunted John these past days, stood quietly in the corner of the hall, her hands gripping the hem of her worn apron, eyes flickering with a faint, fragile glimmer of hope. John stepped forward, his voice deep and warm, but unwavering, each word striking directly at the darkest corners of every heart present. Sunrise Diner was built from nothing but my two bare hands, with a simple dream that every breakfast here would not only fill a stomach, but also warm a heart. But today, I stand here realizing I have let this place lose its way for far too long. Hey, Gesterd. The large screen lit up. Unfiltered, undeniable footage played before them, Gary casually accepting an envelope from a supplier. Cheap, low-quality supplies being pushed into storage. A cold, harsh recording echoed through the hall. Cut the butter, reduce the jam, water down the coffee, tips, put them all into the internal fund. Anyone who doesn't like it is welcome to leave. The entire room froze. A suffocating silence engulfed the space. John turned slowly, his eyes sharp as a blade, locking directly onto Gary. Gary, do you have anything to say before I sign your immediate termination right here and now? Gary swallowed hard, sweat trickling down his temples, but he couldn't utter a single word. John did not hesitate. He pulled a fountain pen from his jacket pocket and signed the dismissal order with a firm stroke. Saving costs must never become an excuse to sell out human dignity. You are officially terminated. And to those who have been complicit in this corruption, you have two choices. Walk away from this place, or stay with me and rebuild from the ground up, based on respect, kindness, and integrity. A heartfelt moment where dawn breaks through. John stepped down from the podium and walked directly toward the petite young woman. His voice softened, like a refreshing breeze sweeping through the suffocating atmosphere. Why didn't you leave this place sooner? The young woman smiled faintly, a sorrowful smile, but in her glistening eyes burned an unshakable resilience. Because I still believed that one day this place would be warm again, like a family breakfast, the kind everyone once dreamed of. John paused, tightening his grip on her hand, his eyes misting. From his pocket, he took out a bank card and gently placed it into her hand. There's $50,000 on this card. This isn't a gift, it's an apology. And more than that, it's an investment in the courage and dignity you've held on to through the darkest of days. He turned around, his voice resonating powerfully throughout the hall like an unbreakable vow. Starting today, I officially announce the comprehensive reform program, Sunrise Reborn. And she, the one who never lost faith in this place, will be the first to join the senior management training program. One day soon, I hope she will stand right here to inspire those who come after her. A thunderous applause broke out, rolling through the hall like ocean waves crashing onto a dry shore. A new era had officially begun. A true dawn had returned to the place where hope had never truly died. Outside the grand glass windows, the sun had just risen above the horizon, its golden light pouring onto the small street below. Sunbeams streamed through the old weathered windows, reflecting against the wall where the original slogan, personally written by John years ago, stood etched. Every breakfast is a happy new beginning. It had been a long time since those words had felt this complete, this true. Inside, the emotional intensity had yet to subside. Veteran employees quietly wiped away their tears. Others grasped their colleagues' hands tightly, as if a new life force had surged through their weary hearts. Lower-level managers, who had once stood silent in the face of injustice, now bowed their heads, heavy-hearted, as they faced the defining choice ahead. John looked at that scene, unable to hold back his emotions. Memories of the very first day he opened the restaurant flooded back days when he stood tirelessly behind the counter, personally preparing the first cup of coffee, inviting the very first customers to try the toasted bread he had poured his heart and soul into. And today he knew that journey was starting over, right here, right now. Inside a small meeting room, John quietly signed a stack of new decisions. Not just dismissal papers, but the very first commitments to reform. The base salary for all employees would be adjusted immediately. A transparent and fair tipping policy would be enforced, with public reporting and equal distribution. Every employee, new or old, would attend a special training program personally led by John and a team of business ethics experts. And in the corner of the room, Emma, that same petite girl, stood before a whiteboard, preparing for her very first speech as an honorary student of the senior management program. John walked in, gently placed his hand on her shoulder, and smiled. "Tell them about the light you held onto in your darkest days, and show them how they too can become that light for others." Emma took a deep breath, stood tall, and her eyes gleamed with pride. In that moment, she knew dawn was no longer just a beautiful phrase. It was here, it was real. It was shining within her heart and within everyone present at Sunrise Diner. A true new era had begun, and this time, that flame would never die out again. No more weary sighs, no more quietly despondent eyes. All across the main hall, laughter echoed joyously like a symphony of happiness, awakened after a long, forgotten slumber. The warm aroma of freshly baked pancakes mingled with the rich scent of roasted coffee, spreading throughout the space like the breath of a perfect sunny day. At the center stage, under the vibrant new banner reading, "Sunrise Reborn," the girl from the past Emma now wore a crisp new uniform. On her chest gleamed a shining name badge. Emma Williams, Assistant General Manager. Her face no longer bore the hardships of her past. Instead, it shone with pride. Her clear eyes turned toward the group of new employees seated below, young people filled with ambition and dreams. Emma's voice rang out soft but powerful, as if every word had been forged through the darkest nights she had survived. "I used to sit back there in that little kitchen corner with just enough money to buy a piece of dry bread and wait for the end of my shift, hoping for some leftover scraps. But even in those darkest days, I never gave up hope. And today, I stand here to tell you, if you keep the light in your heart open, the tiniest spark dawn will eventually find its way to you." The applause roared like crashing waves, not just encouragement, but a declaration that a new era for Sunrise Diner had officially begun. Up on the rooftop, behind the wide glass window, John stood silently. His arms were folded across his chest, his contemplative eyes looking down at the packed dining hall below. Laughter and conversation echoed throughout the space. The warm aroma of pancakes drifted gently with every breath, and the rich scent of coffee mingled with the morning breeze like a peaceful melody. A soft breeze ran through his silvered hair. In the coolness of the early morning, John smiled faintly, his eyes shining with a quiet yet fulfilled glow. He whispered, as if sending a promise into the breaking dawn, This is the dawn I always dreamed of." That dawn wasn't just breaking in the sky, it was rising in every gaze, every breath of the people standing within Sunrise Diner. Emma paused for a moment after her heartfelt speech. Her eyes swept across the room, resting on the young staff members, some still hesitant, others already teary-eyed. She stepped down from the stage and walked toward a young kitchen assistant, barely 18 years old, his thin frame and shy face half hidden behind the rows of chairs. Gently placing her hand on his shoulder, she said, "And the most important thing, do you know what it is? Never think you're too small to make a difference. I once couldn't even afford breakfast and thought the same way. But today, I stand here not just to share an old story, but to prove that no matter who you are, as long as you don't give up hope, you can stand in any position life has to offer." The applause rose again, but this time, it wasn't just applause. It was the sound of hearts being awakened. From the rooftop, John watched it all. He saw in that crowd the once weary, exhausted faces now glowing with new life. The loyal customers who had once quietly walked away had now returned, holding steaming cups of coffee, their laughter bright and lively. A little girl ran joyfully around the table by the window right where John himself used to sit during his earliest days building the business, holding a pancake still steaming in her tiny hands. The doorbell chimed gently. An elderly couple, hands tightly clasped, walked in. They looked up and nodded toward John, recognizing him through the rooftop window. He realized with a start these were his very first customers from all those years ago. The soft morning breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of melting butter and golden, freshly baked pancakes. In that moment, John closed his tired old eyes and let every sound, every scent, every warmth flood his senses. And when he opened his eyes again, they gleamed with a quiet but profound happiness. His voice echoed gently, a promise to himself and the world. This is the dawn I always dreamed of. And with that dawn, Sunrise Diner didn't just open a new day, it opened a whole new journey, a place where everyone could live, contribute, and truly find happiness. Under the soft sunlight streaming through the glass windows, Emma stepped down from the stage, her footsteps slowly making their way down the center aisle. With each step, countless eyes followed her from those just starting out in life to those who had almost given up hope. She paused at the coffee station, where the young trainee, the same boy who used to hide timidly behind the tables, was now nervously preparing his first cup of coffee for a customer. His hands trembled slightly, afraid he might mess up. Emma smiled gently, leaned down, and whispered, "You don't have to be perfect the first time. You just have to be brave enough to start." A beast, the boy's eyes lit up, and a shy smile bloomed on his youthful face. It was such a small moment, yet to John, standing on the rooftop, it was the most beautiful sight he had witnessed in years. Outside, the sunlight began shining directly onto the brand new sign of Sunrise Diner. Under that golden light, the sign gleamed as if making a silent promise to the future. The place where good things begin. Number 10. John took a deep breath, the crisp morning air seeping into every cell, washing away the heaviness of past years. Down in the lobby, elderly customers quietly took their usual seats, ordering their favorite dishes, but this time, with entirely renewed spirits. Outside, people continued to gather, bicycles neatly parked under the eaves. Children's joyful voices rang out as they received free pancakes, a new program Sunrise Diner had just launched. Breakfast smiles for school children. Oh, John turned his gaze to the left, where an old photo of him and his first colleagues hung proudly on the wall. He smiled softly and whispered in his heart, "Do you see it, my friends? We found the light again." A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the soft jingling of the wind chimes outside. In that brilliant sunlight, everything seemed to glow anew, fresh, vibrant, and full of life. And at that very moment, as the sunlight poured fully into the grand hall, John silently vowed, "This isn't just a new dawn, it's a true rebirth." And so, Sunrise Diner turned a new page where every breakfast didn't just warm the stomach, but also warm the soul. A journey where, no matter who you are or where you come from, you have the right to hope, to dream, and to find your own light. You may build a glorious empire, but if you forget the value of humanity, it will all be nothing but a castle built on sand. A sustainable business is not built on cold numbers, but on hearts that have been warmed, dreams that have been reignited, and lives that have found happiness because of you. Because in the end, the greatest legacy you can leave behind is not a vast fortune, but the lives you've touched with kindness and compassion.